An order in architecture is a certain assemblage of parts subject to uniform established proportions, regulated by the office that each part has to perform. The architectural orders are the ancient styles of classical architecture, each distinguished by its proportions and characteristic profiles and details, and most readily recognizable by the type of column employed. Three ancient orders of architecture, the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, originated in Greece. To these the Romans added the Tuscan, which they made simpler than Doric, and the Composite, which was more ornamental than the Corinthian. The architectural order of a classical building is akin to the mode or key of classical music, the grammar or rhetoric of a written composition. It is established by certain modules like the intervals of music, and it raises certain expectations in an audience attuned to its language. Elements. Each style has distinctive capitals and entablatures. The column shaft is sometimes articulated with vertical hollow grooves known as fluting. The shaft is wider at the bottom than at the top, because its entasis, beginning a third of the way up, imperceptibly makes the column slightly more slender at the top, although some Doric columns are visibly flared, with straight profiles that narrow going up the shaft. The capital rests on the shaft. It has a load-bearing function, which concentrates the weight of the entablature on the supportive column, but it primarily serves an aesthetic purpose. The necking is the continuation of the shaft, but is visually separated by one or many grooves. The Aquinas lies atop the necking. It is a circular block that bulges outwards towards the top to support the abacus, which is a square or shaped block that in turn supports the entablature. The entablature consists of three horizontal layers, all of which are visually separated from each other using moldings or bands. In Roman and post-Renaissance work, the entablature may be carried from column to column in the form of an arch that springs from the column that bears its weight, retaining its divisions and sculptural enrichment, if any. Measurement. The height of columns are calculated in terms of a ratio between the diameter of the shaft at its base and the height of the column. A Doric column can be described as 7 diameters high, an Ionic column as 8 diameters high, and a Corinthian column 9 diameters high, although the actual ratios used vary considerably in both ancient and revived examples, but keeping to the trend of increasing slimness between the orders. Sometimes this is phrased as lower diameters high, to establish which part of the shaft has been measured. Greek orders. There are 3 distinct orders in ancient Greek architecture: Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. These 3 were adopted by the Romans, who modified their capitals. The Roman adoption of the Greek orders took place in the 1st century BC. The 3 ancient Greek orders have since been consistently used in neoclassical European architecture. Sometimes the Doric order is considered the earliest order, but there is no evidence to support this. Both the Doric and the Ionic order appear to have originated in wood. The Temple of Hera in Olympia is the oldest well-preserved temple of Doric architecture. It was built just after 600 BC. The Doric order later spread across Greece and into Sicily, where it was the chief order for monumental architecture for 800 years. Doric order. The Doric order originated on the mainland and western Greece. It is the simplest of the orders, characterized by short, faceted, heavy columns with plain, round capitals and no base. With a height that is only 4 to 8 times its diameter, the columns are the most squat of all orders. The shaft of the Doric order is channeled with 20 flutes. The capital consists of a necking which is of a simple form. The Aquinas is convex and the abacus is square. Above the capital is a square abacus connecting the capital to the entablature. The entablature is divided into 3 horizontal registers, the lower part of which is either smooth or divided by horizontal lines. The upper half is distinctive for the Doric order. The frieze of the Doric entablature is divided into triglyphs and metopes. A triglyph is a unit consisting of 3 vertical bands which are separated by grooves. Metopes are the plain or carved reliefs between 2 triglyphs. The Greek forms of the Doric order come without an individual base. They instead are placed directly on the stylobate. Later forms, however, came with the conventional base consisting of a plinth and a torus. The Roman versions of the Doric order have smaller proportions. As a result, they appear lighter than the Greek orders. Ionic Order. The Ionic Order came from Eastern Greece, where its origins are entwined with the similar but little-known Aeolic Order. It is distinguished by slender, fluted pillars with a large base and two opposed volutes in the Aquinas of the capital. The Aquinas itself is decorated with an egg and dart motif. The Ionic shaft comes with 4 more flutes than the Doric counterpart. The Ionic base has 2 convex mouldings called tori which are separated by a scotia. The Ionic order is also marked by an entasis, a curved tapering in the column shaft. A column of the Ionic order is 9 times its lower diameter. The shaft itself is 8 diameters high. The architrave of the entablature commonly consists of 3-stepped bands. The frieze comes without the Doric triglyph and metope. The frieze sometimes comes with a continuous ornament such as carved figures instead. Corinthian Order. The Corinthian Order is the most ornate of the Greek orders, characterized by a slender fluted column having an ornate capital decorated with 2 rows of acanthus leaves and 4 scrolls. It is commonly regarded as the most elegant of the 3 orders. The shaft of the Corinthian Order has 24 flutes. The column is commonly 10 diameters high. The Roman writer Vitruvius credited the invention of the Corinthian order to Callimachus, a Greek sculptor of the 5th century BC. The oldest known building built according to this order is the Choragic monument of Lysocrates in Athens, constructed from 335 to 334 BC. The Corinthian order was raised to rank by the writings of Vitruvius in the 1st century BC. Roman orders. The Romans adapted all the Greek orders and also developed 2 orders of their own, basically modifications of Greek orders. The Romans also invented the superposed order. A superposed order is when successive stories of a building have different orders. The heaviest orders were at the bottom, whilst the lightest came at the top. This means that the Doric order was the order of the ground floor. The Ionic order was used for the middle story, while the Corinthian or the Composite Order was used for the top story. The Colossal Order was invented by architects in the Renaissance. The Colossal Order is characterized by columns that extend the height of 2 or more stories. Tuscan Order. The Tuscan Order has a very plain design, with a plain shaft, and a simple capital, base, and frieze. It is a simplified adaptation of the Doric Order by the Romans. The Tuscan Order is characterized by an unfluted shaft and a capital that only consists of an Aquinas and an abacus. In proportions it is similar to the Doric Order, but overall it is significantly plainer. The column is normally 7 diameters high. Compared to the other orders, the Tuscan Order looks the most solid. Composite Order. The Composite Order is a mixed order, combining the volutes of the Ionic with the leaves of the Corinthian Order. Until the Renaissance it was not ranked as a separate order. Instead it was considered as a late Roman form of the Corinthian Order. The column of the Composite Order is 10 diameters high. Historical development of the orders. The Renaissance period saw renewed interest in the literary sources of the ancient cultures of Greece and Rome, and the fertile development of a new architecture based on classical principles. Rediscovered in the 15th century, Vitruvius was instantly hailed as the authority on architecture. However, in his text the word order is not to be found. To describe the 4 species of columns he uses, in fact, various words such as genus, emos, opera. The term order, as well as the idea of redefining the canon, started circulating in Rome at the beginning of the 16th century, probably during the studies of Vitruvius, a text conducted and shared by Peruzzi, Raphael and San Gallo. Ever since, the definition of the canon has been a collective endeavor that involved several generations of European architects from Renaissance and Baroque periods, basing their theories both on the study of Vitruvius' writings and the observation of Roman ruins. What was added were rules for the use of the architectural orders, and the exact proportions of them down to the most minute detail. Commentary on the appropriateness of the orders for temples devoted to particular deities were elaborated by Renaissance theorists, with Doric characterized as bold and manly, Ionic as matronly, and Corinthian as maidenly. Vignola defining the concept of order, following the examples of Attribution and the 5 books of the Regola Generali di Architettura sopra la cinque maniere de gli edifici by Sebastiano Serlio, published from 1537 onwards. Giacomo Barozzi da Vignola produced an architecture rule book that was not only more practical than the previous 2 treatises, but also was systematically and consistently adopting, for the first time, the term order to define each of the 5 different species of columns inherited from antiquity. A first publication of the various plates, as separate sheets, appeared in Rome in 1562, with the title, Regola degli cinque ordini di architettura. As David Watkin has pointed out, Vignola's book was to have an astonishing publishing history of over 500 editions in 400 years in 10 languages. Italian, Dutch, English, Flemish, French, German, Portuguese, Russian, Spanish, Swedish, during which it became perhaps the most influential book of all times. The book consisted simply of an introduction followed by 32 annotated plates, highlighting the proportional system with all the minute details of the 5 architectural orders. According to Christoph Thiens, the main expert of Renaissance architectural treatises, in accordance with Vitruvius's example, Vignola chose a module equal to a half diameter, which is the base of the system. All the other measurements are expressed in fractions or in multiples of this module. The result is an arithmetical model, and with its help each order, harmoniously proportioned, can easily be adapted to any given height of a facade or an interior. From this point of view, Vignola's Regola is a remarkable intellectual achievement. In America, The American Builder's Companion, written in the early 19th century by the architect Asher Benjamin, influenced many builders in the eastern states, particularly those who developed what became known as the Federal style. The last American reinterpretation of Vignola's Regola was edited in 1904 by William Robert Ware. The break from the classical mode came first with the Gothic revival, then the development of modernism during the 19th century. The Bauhaus promoted pure functionalism, stripped of superfluous ornament, and that has become one of the defining characteristics of modern architecture. There are some exceptions. Postmodernism introduced an ironic use of the orders as a cultural reference, divorced from the strict rules of composition. On the other hand, a few practitioners, e.g., Quinlan Terry, still work in a traditional classical idiom, nonce orders. Several orders, usually based upon the Composite Order and only varying in the design of the capitals, have been invented under the inspiration of specific occasions, but have not been used again. Thus they may be termed nonce orders, on the analogy of nonce words. Robert Adams' brother James was in Rome in 1762, drawing antiquities under the direction of Cleriso. He invented a British order, of which his ink and wash rendering with red highlighting is at the Avery Library, Columbia University. Adam published an engraving of it. In its capital, where heraldic lion and unicorn take the place of the composites volutes, a Byzantine, Romanesque conception, but expressed in terms of neoclassical realism. In 1789, George Dance invented an Ammonite Order, a variant of Ionic, substituting volutes in the form of fossil ammonites for John Boydell's Shakespeare Gallery in Pall Mall, London. In the United States, Benjamin Latrobe, the architect of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., designed a series of botanically American orders. Most famous is the order substituting corn cobs and their husks, which was executed by Giuseppe Franzoni and employed in the small domed vestibule of the Supreme Court. Only the Supreme Court survived the fire of August 24, 1814, nearly intact. With peace restored, Latrobe designed an American order that substituted for the acanthus tobacco leaves, of which he sent a sketch to Thomas Jefferson in a letter, November 5, 1816. He was encouraged to send a model of it, which remains at Monticello. In the 1830s, Alexander Jackson Davis admired it enough to make a drawing of it. In 1809, Latrobe invented a second American order, employing magnolia flowers constrained within the profile of classical mouldings. As his drawing demonstrates, it was intended for the upper columns in the gallery of the entrance of the chamber of the Senate. Edwin Lutyens, who from 1912 laid out New Delhi as the new seat of government for the British Empire in India, designed a Delhi order having a capital displaying a band of vertical ridges, and with bells hanging at each corner as a replacement for volutes. His design for the new city's central palace, Viceroy's House, now the presidential residence Rashtrapati Bhavan, was a thorough integration of elements of Indian architecture into a building of classical forms and proportions, and made use of the order throughout. The Delhi Order reappears in some later Lutyens buildings including Campion Hall, Oxford. These nonce orders all express that speaking architecture that was taught in the Paris courses, most explicitly by Etienne Louis Boulet, in which sculptural details of classical architecture could be enlisted to speak symbolically, the better to express the purpose of the structure and enrich its visual meaning with specific appropriateness. This idea was taken up strongly in the training of Beaux Arts architecture, California 1875 to 1915. See Architecture parlante.